Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to our lesson today. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but hopefully this is the next best thing. All right, so what we're going to do today is lesson 6 for Unit 4, Inquiries into Research in Health and Social Care. And today's lesson is going to be on primary research methods. Now, most of you will have completed the exam prep lesson that I set online for you. So you should have a bit of inside information about different primary research methods. So that'll give you a good head start for today's lesson. So what we're going to do today is we're going to start off with a recap activity like we normally do. So that's a Nearpod. So in a moment I'll be asking you to pause this video and log on to Nearpod and complete the recap activities. And then we're going to move on to defining what primary research is. So you should be able to explain to somebody what primary research is by the end of this lesson. And then we're going to move on to looking at different types of primary research methods. So we're going to identify and describe at least 4 primary research methods. And if you've completed the online learning prep, exam prep lesson that I set for you, then you should have already done that. And then once we've done that, we're going to assess at least 4 of them. So we're going to look at the strengths and weaknesses, so the advantages and disadvantages of using each type of research method. And then we'll compare and contrast them as well. So we'll look at the similarities and the differences between them all. Okay, so that is our plan for today. So let's move on to looking at our first learning outcome, which is a recap activity based on what we did last week. So in a moment, I want you to pause this video and then go to Nearpod, where you'll complete a recap activity. This is all based on what we did last week. So if you were in for the lesson and if you completed the online exam prep lesson, then you should have no problems in completing this Nearpod. The code lesson that you need is F9ZNX. So if you can all pause the video now and then go to Nearpod and complete the recap activity, and then when you come back, just continue with this video. Good luck, everyone. Okay, welcome back. So I hope you all found that Nearpod activity useful, and I hope you all managed to complete it successfully. I will be checking on Nearpod to have a look at your results, but well done everybody, you've managed to recall what we did last week. So now let's move on to defining what primary research is, which is our second learning outcome for today. What I would like you to do is just take a moment to complete this sentence. So you might want to pause the video and then write down in your notebooks what you think primary research is. So complete the sentence. Primary research is. So primary research, as I've talked about in a lot of my lessons, is research that is done for the very first time. And we often do it to find something out, but something that is new, something that's not necessarily been discovered or found before. So that is why we do primary research. It's the first time it's been done. It can be an experiment or a project, and it can be carried out by individuals or groups of people, but the focus is that they will be looking at things, like I said, that have not been done before. And it uses a variety of different methods to generate primary data, which is known as empirical data. So if data is empirical, it means it has been found based on research and primary research methods. And the data obtained, as you know, can be both qualitative and quantitative. So we can get statistics, facts, figures, but we can also get more detailed research as well, like feelings and attitudes and opinions and responses. So primary research is really, really important. What I would like you to do now is pause the video and just do a quick knowledge check. So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to find 3 strengths and 3 weaknesses of both qualitative and quantitative data. So just pause the video for a couple of minutes and write down strengths and weaknesses of both. So good things and bad things. Okay, off you go. Right, welcome back everybody. So I just want to get you thinking now, because I've talked a lot in my lessons about primary research. So which experiments have we discussed in previous lessons which are examples of primary research? So just have a think about that now. If you just pause the video for a second and have a think about it. My dog's barking, so please excuse my dog barking in the background. Okay, so some of the experiments that we've discussed in previous lessons, which are examples of primary research, are these ones. Now, these might sound familiar to you. So, do you remember when we talked about Pavlov's dog, which was all about classical conditioning, and how Pavlov noticed that when dogs saw food, they produced saliva? So, he wanted to then make them produce saliva when they were shown something else other than food. We looked at Bandora's Bobo doll experiment. We looked at Little Albert. We talked about Stanley Milgram and his electric shock experiment. And in psychology last year, you should have also looked at Skinner's rat, which was to do with operant conditioning. So these are all examples of primary research because they are studies, they are experiments that were carried out for the very first time to find out something new. Okay, so you should by now all be able to define what primary research is. So well done. What we're going to do now is move on to looking at learning outcomes 3, 4 and 5. So we're going to identify and describe at least 4 primary research methods, evaluate all 4 of them, and then whilst we're doing that, we're going to look at similarities and differences between the 2 as well. So that is what we're going to be moving on to next. So, now that you understand what primary research is, it is necessary for you to be aware of the different methods that can be used to obtain primary data. So when I keep saying this word methods, I'm referring to primary research methods. So think of the method as also as kind of like being a tool for gathering data. So that's what I mean by the term method. Right, so primary research methods. There are several different methods that you can use, and the one you choose will depend on the type of research or the type of information that you want to find out. So you can choose. None of them are better than any other, they are just all different and they're used for different purposes. So the first research method is a questionnaire. Then we also have interviews. We can use case studies, we can use observations, scientific experiments are very good to use as well, surveys, and then finally checklists. So these are research methods, and if you all completed the online learning exam prep task that I set this week, you should be familiar with all these by now. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move on to looking at each one individually. But before that, we need to think about which method to use. So like I said before, it doesn't really matter which method you use as such. What does matter is that you're using the right method to find the right research and the right information. So what kind of evidence do you want to obtain? This is a question that you need to ask yourself when deciding which method to use. So, do you want to just find out facts, figures, statistics, opinions, reasons? Do you want numbers? Do you want words? Or do you want both? Are you trying to find out personal things? Are you trying to find out things that are professional? So all these questions need to be answered for you to decide which method to use. Another thing to think about as well is how much time do you have, because some of these research methods can take a while to do, whereas some are quite quick and easy. And also, what resources do you have? So, for example, if you wanted to do a survey, have you got enough people? Have you got the right resources to be able to do that survey? And by resources, I mean time, money, the knowledge, the expertise, the materials, all those things that you need to carry out research. You have to think about whether or not you've got them. You also need to think about what it is you want to discover. So what are you trying to find out? So once you know these things, you can then choose a research method that will allow you to find out exactly what you want. So let's look at interviews a bit more closely. So as you'll know from your online learning task I set for the exam prep lesson, interviews will involve an interviewer, and that interviewer interacts directly with an individual to get information. And then the information the interviewer gets will be included in the research. So if you want to use interviews, then it's best to be using interviews when you want to get in-depth details and information. So if you want a lot of detail for your research, then you need to be conducting interviews because they allow for that to happen. Now there's two types of interviews. You can have a structured interview or you can have an unstructured interview. So the thing with a structured interview is that you are asking a set question. So you are asking a list of questions that you've already got set. So you've almost got some sort of structure. So you've got an end goal for that interview and you follow a structure in order to get to that end goal. An unstructured interview is still a good way to interview, but there's no specific structure. You've got a rough idea of what you want to find out, but you're just going to go along with the interview and see how it goes and then see if you can obtain that information. So you've got structured and you've got unstructured. And the good thing about interviews is that you get to ask the questions. So you can use closed questions or you can use open questions. So if you think about closed questions, they require shorter answers such as yes or no answers, one-word answers. That's not going to give you lots and lots of information to work on though. So you need to be asking open questions because they tend to work better in an interview. So for example, what or why sort of questions, because they allow the person you're asking the question to give you a more detailed answer. Interviews are always led by the interviewer, so you've got more control, and they are very useful for small scale research because if you were conducting research and you had to interview 200 people, that would be a lot. So you would probably use a questionnaire instead of an interview then. So interviews are good for small scale research, and they're also good for getting qualitative and quantitative data. But it's mainly qualitative. I've just realised the mistake on my PowerPoint there, so it should say on that bottom point, qualitative and quantitative, but you would mainly get qualitative. I apologise for my mistake. Okay, so a little bit more about interviews. I'm sure that you've all been to an interview. I know that you would have had interviews when you enrolled on the course at college. Some of you might have had UCAS interviews already. Some of you might have had job interviews. So you'll be familiar with interviews and you should know that they can take place in a number of ways. So they can be formal and they can be informal. So a formal interview would be like when you go for a job interview. An informal interview could be questions that you're answering in front of people that you know. It depends on the situation and it depends on the purpose of the research, but generally they are formal. The most common type of interview would be face-to-face. Now, as these pictures on the slide suggest, it could be one person speaking to another person, or it could be one person speaking to several people, but it would be face-to-face. It can be over the telephone, it can be through text messaging, it can be online, and most recently, and most appropriately, video conferencing like Skype, Teams, and Zoom. they are all being used nowadays, especially with the COVID pandemic at the moment, because you're not supposed to be meeting people face to face. So video conferencing has kind of shaped the way of interviews lately, and you probably find that some of your UCAS interviews will actually be using those methods. Interviews can also take place via social media and networking. And then, like I said before, there could be a focus group with several interviewees. So a focus group is where you've got a group of people and they are being asked questions about a particular topic, about a particular subject. I don't know whether any of you watch things like The Apprentice. If on The Apprentice, where they have to develop a new product, they would have a focus group where they would get a group of people who they think would use that product, and then they would ask them questions about it. So it's a focus group, it's focusing on one particular thing. So there's a number of ways that interviews can take place. Now the question is when to use interviews. Use an interview when detailed information is required, when knowledge and understanding is being sought from a specialist as well. So if you want to find out information from a professional person, then you would interview them to obtain that information. Again, like I said, use an interview when you've got a small sample population. And by sample population, I mean the number of people that you're going to involve in your study. So if you had a sample of, say, 10 people, it would be realistic to interview those 10 people. If you had a sample of 200 people, you'd find it a lot harder because it would be very time consuming. Another benefit of using interviews is that participants might have difficulties in completing other methods. So they might not understand a questionnaire or a survey or an online method. So with an interview, you are there to guide that person through the interview and help them with it. Also, when qualitative data is required. So if you want good detailed answers, so you want a qualitative response, then this interview is the best one to use. And it's also good when you want to investigate a wide range of experiences as well. Okay, so let's move on to looking at questionnaires. I'm sure that you've all filled out questionnaires before. I'll put a picture on the screen now of what a questionnaire might look like. Excuse me. So questionnaires, very, very simple, straightforward way to obtain lots of information. And it's usually statistical, and you can get that from many people. And we call those people completing the questionnaire a respondent. So you can use it to get lots of information, statistical information from respondents. A questionnaire will contain a list of pre-set questions. Now these can either be open or closed, but they tend to be closed in a questionnaire because the reason why they're closed is because they're not intended for in-depth responses. They need to be quick and easy for somebody to complete. It's easy to process the information as well because the questions are worded quite simply and quite straightforward. They're systematic as well, so they follow a particular system and they are fast and efficient, and they can be completed by an individual, by themselves, or they can be verbally asked as well. Now, with a questionnaire, it is possible to get qualitative data, but you would mostly be obtaining quantitative data because you want to get really statistics and you want to get some straightforward basic information. But they can be used to look at both. So that's a questionnaire. So it's now time to look at the third primary research method, which is case studies. Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with the term case studies because we give you a lot of case studies in your lessons. But this means something slightly different to what you've been given in your lessons. So a case study is an intensive study about a group or about an individual person. So it's where your research focuses on a particular person or group of people. It's really useful for monitoring and gaining specific information about something in particular. So it might be a particular topic or a particular area that you are focusing on. And the best way to find your information out is to form a case study. It also allows research to be tested. So what I mean by that is, if you carry out some research into a particular thing, so let's say, for example, you wanted to find out if taking vitamins improved the exam success of students studying for their GCSEs. So your case study would be focusing on a group of people, because you're focusing on 16-year-old high school students who are taking their exams. So that is your case study. And if you want to test whether or not something works, you could ask those people in the case study to take vitamins, and then they would meet and discuss how well they think they did in their exams. And then you'd be able to compare that to a case study of people that didn't take the vitamins. So you'd be able to see if there was a difference. Okay, so that is how it allows research to be tested. It provides useful further information as well, so we can go a little bit deeper. We can find out a little bit more about a particular topic. And then it also allows us to gain qualitative data, because you are gaining a lot of detail from that research, from that case study. Okay, so next we're going to have a look at observations. And do you like to see what I did there? We're going to look at observations. I thought that was quite funny. Right, okay, so observations. It's not a difficult one to get your head around this, because the name says it all really. It's to observe. And that involves closely watching or monitoring something or someone. And it's good for small and medium-sized projects. The reason why we wouldn't use an observation with a large-scale population is because it's difficult to observe. We can focus when we're observing smaller things rather than larger things, because we get to see more. And it allows the researcher to gain a detailed understanding of something. But one thing you need to be aware of is bias. And we don't want the observer to be biased. Now, what I mean by that is, when some people are being observed, because they know they're being observed, they behave differently. They act differently. And that's what we call the bias effect. So the observer effect. So when somebody is watching, you would do what you think you should do rather than what you would do naturally. Okay, so if that makes sense. Also, we all see things differently. So if you've got somebody observing, say, a group of children, and you're observing them to find out how well they interact together on the school playground, okay, some people might interpret their behaviour differently. So you might see two children play fighting, and I might think to myself as an observer, yeah, that's what children do, they're having a play fight. But somebody else might see that as being aggressive. So you can interpret behaviours differently, and that's what we mean by bias. So you've got to remember, people see things differently. But observations are a really good way to be able to watch or monitor something. And like I said, the example of watching children play on the school playground is a good way to carry out research to find out how they interact with each other. And it's useful for research involving monitoring behaviour as well, as I've just discussed. In terms of the type of data you get from this, you've got qualitative or quantitative data. You are more likely to be able to get qualitative data from this, because you are observing behaviours and you're making notes of the behaviours, but you can still get quantitative as well, because you might be looking at how often something happens. So for example, if you go back to these children on the playground, how many times do children shout, or how many times do they interact with each other. So you can still get some numbers and statistics as well. So you can get both. Okay, so this is where I'm going to hand over to you. So it's your turn to assess primary research methods. So far, we've looked at 4 primary research methods. So we have looked at questionnaires, interviews, case studies, and observations. For the rest of this lesson, I want you to look at these 4 methods more closely and assess them. So this is really extending on what you did in the exam prep lesson. So for each one, I want you to explain 3 strengths and 3 weaknesses. So I want 3 strengths of interviews, 3 weaknesses of interviews, and the same for the other 4. Once you've done that, I want your work to be written up on a Word document and upload it to your folder on Teams. I will be checking to see if you've done this as well. Now, if any of you want to do your work, write it down and take a picture, you can still upload that to Teams as well. I'm happy with you doing that, no problems whatsoever, as long as I can see some evidence that you've completed the work. So that is what I would like you to do for the rest of this lesson. Now, don't turn off the video yet, because I've still got some more instructions for you. For your homework, yes, you've all got homework, and I know it's half term next week, so you've got a bit longer to work on this, and it really is important that you do this. There are 3 other primary research methods that we haven't discussed in this lesson. I want you to carry out your own research and find out as much as you can about these 3 primary research methods. So, scientific experiments, surveys, and checklists. So I want you to find out as much as you can about those. Write up your notes and bring it with you for our first lesson back after the half-term break. So, before I let you go, let's just have a quick recap on what we've done so far. So we've done a recap activity where you've all been onto Nearpod and answered some questions about what you learnt last week. Well done for that. Like I said, I will be checking. You can all now define what primary research is. So primary research is research that is carried out for the first time to find out something new. And then we have started looking at 4 different types of primary research methods. So today we've looked at interviews, questionnaires, case studies, and observations. And you are now going to be completing a task in which you assess at least 4 of those. Well, you assess all 4 of those primary research methods. And throughout the lesson as well, what I've tried to do is compare them to each other as well. So we've compared interviews to questionnaires, for example. So that is what you've learned with me today. A lot of what you've learned is going to come in very useful for the exam, because the research you get in the exam is going to be based on primary research that has been carried out. And you have to, at some point in the exam, be able to assess whether or not you think the research methods that the researchers used were the best. So it's important that you understand what primary research methods are and that you are able to evaluate them. So everything you've learned today is mega important for the exam. Okay, right, that is everything. So next week is half term, as you know, so enjoy yourselves, have a really good time, but stay safe, obviously. We return to college, when we return to college after half term, we're going to start looking at research ethics, and I'm going to start giving you some mock exams as well. I know I've been threatening this for the last couple of weeks, so be prepared for when you come back after half term for us to sit down and do some mock exams, because it's about time we started getting you ready for this exam. Okay, right, so you can end the video now once I finish talking. I want you to go and carry on with that assessment activity and upload your work to Teams once you've finished. I will be online during your normal lesson times, so you can contact me on Teams anytime for the rest of this lesson. And hopefully I'll speak to you all soon. If you've got any questions, like I said, just give me a shout on Teams. Thanks very much, everybody. Good luck. Bye.